So let's see. I've told you about the festival. I've told you about this session and these workshops. Um, that's more than enough for right now because I'm anxious, and I know you guys are anxious to hear what Hank has to say. So Hank told me not to be real big on introductions. I think I should be real big on introductions because I think it's really important for you to know the caliber of instructors that we have. And Hank's not only had his own radio show with storytellers down in Houston, he's an educator, he's a doctor, he's a big guy when it comes to storytelling and speaking. He's kind of shy about it sometimes, but he really does know the subject. A lot of us, it's sort of like with music. You know, some people play the piano and they just play by ear and they never actually really had to study. This is somebody who's actually studied, so he can actually teach you the notes and teach you how things should go. And you don't have to just do it by ear and what you think you know about storytelling. What I've learned is when I think I know it, there's always that much more to learn, and I'm anxious to see what I can learn from Mr. Hank. So, guys, get ready to take a lot of notes. Refer to your handouts. Keep your ears open. You're going to be in the hands of a master. Dr. Hank Roubicek, go with court. Hank, it's all yours.
Hands of a master. Wow. I hate those kind of introductions. Only my mother cares that I'm a doctor, first of all. And that was an awfully kind introduction. Thank you, Michael, very much. It was interesting that you talked about.
Hank, were you on mute, please?
There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you, Michael. It's interesting that you talked about music on a page. One of my favorite films is Mr. Holland's Opus. Some of you may have seen it. There's a scene in that film where one of his students comes in and tells him, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to play the clarinet. And he asks her, is it any fun? And she says, it used to be. Then he replies, you know what we're doing wrong? We're looking at notes on a page. I can teach you notes on a page, but I can't teach you those other things. Music is about heart. It's about soul. It's about something beautiful, about something rhythmic, about something that we think about effortlessly. And in many ways, that's exactly what storytelling is, because despite the fact that we can talk about some of the specifics, some of the anecdotes, and some of the ingredients, ultimately, storytelling really is about heart. It really is about soul. It really is about something beautiful. And all of you know that better than anyone else. I am mildly embarrassed to do this because I know most of you and I have learned so much from you. So I only hope that some of the things that I offer tonight will at least give you a few things to think about and offer a few insights. I've got some notes in front of me because I don't want to derail or meander too much, so you'll forgive me if I look down at them. The handout that Michael was making reference to is a handout that pretty much outlines the general areas that I'd like to cover. And those areas are growing up with storytelling and what storytelling has done for me and ultimately for society, what storytelling teaches us in terms of learning outcomes, and then looking at some of the components of storytelling. What is a narrative arc? What is a tone? What is a theme? What is a motif? What is a plot? Those sorts of things. And hopefully by the end of the night, what we have is a culmination of an understanding of a little bit more insight about why storytelling is so very important to us, what it actually teaches us beyond just learning to tell a story, and understanding both definitionally and conceptually some of the components that are in a story. Many of you know that I was raised in a storytelling home. Everything that I heard was in storytelling form. My grandmother, my grandfather, my mother were all Holocaust survivors, and all that really means is that everything that they said was in some sort of rich narrative form. That's what they believed in. That's how they grew up. So, for example, if I would ask my grandmother, I remember saying to her once, you know, Grammy, I don't know what I want to do for a living. I don't know what I want to do for a career. She was into that, you know, as you might imagine. That's what older Jewish grandmothers do for a living. They bother you, they pick on you, and they tell you you have to be a lawyer. So in the meantime, when I'm a little kid, I'm downstairs, I remember in my basement, and I'm playing the drums, and I'm really good at it. And my grandmother comes downstairs and says, and I'm 5 years old, says, "Oh, that's really cute. I don't know how that will help you become a heart surgeon, but you really sound great." Now I'm 5 years old. So I learned from a very young age that I better do something meaningful, I guess. But I remember asking her, well, I'm a little concerned about what I want to do. I'm concerned about the future. So this is the story that she shared with me. Totally improv. She said, a little boy and his mother attend a fair. The mother won a prize at the fair. It was a sofa. Well, the mother was happy because she really needed one. She was told that the couch would be delivered in 3 months. When the young boy heard about the new sofa, he told his mother that he would jump on that couch all day and all night. Well, the mother, becoming a little upset with her son, told him that he better not. Well, children are children, and as children, they like to aggravate their parents. So the little boy continued to tell his mother that he would jump and jump as hard as he could on that couch. Well, the mother became an angry person with her son, and she never talked to him again. And the sofa, it never came. Look, my guess is as good as yours. I don't know. But it somehow had to do with why I shouldn't worry about what I'm going to do for a living. Because the more I think about it, I guess the less that sofa will come. I don't know. I don't know exactly. But I remember telling her that when I was much older, an adult, I said, you know, a friend of mine, Mike, someone she knew very well, is finally getting married. Now, he was engaged 3 times earlier. So she said to me, well, I wouldn't go out and buy a suit yet. That was her response to that. Not congratulations. She just said, don't go out and buy a suit yet. That was her humor. That's what she did. And what I came away with as I became older and mature and try to figure out what all of that really meant, because it means so much to me still today, is that it really validates who I am. It defines me. It crystallizes my perception about the world. It gives me the impression of who I am and the people that I love. It really does define me. These are memorable moments that I literally cannot do without. Also, these stories that I heard growing up taught me a great deal about the kind of common denominators that we think about that bring all of us together when we tell especially personal stories. And that's volatility and vulnerability. Because being vulnerable is really what we have to be able to do if we're going to tell a story, right? We're always taking a risk, some more than others. But in any event, her stories really smacked more of an anthology of Eastern European folklore than anything else. And I constantly think about 1001 Nights. Some of you know that anthology, a collection of Mideast folk tales compiled in Arabic during the Islamic Golden Age. That sounded like my grandmother's stories, really. And stories like Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. These are all stories that I loved because, frankly, I felt like I was reading about my grandmother. But regardless of these folk tales, these stories are designed to help us keep not just ourselves in place and in perspective, but it teaches us about the customs and traditions that we need to keep safe and we need to sustain. And we're living in a world, as I'll talk in just a few minutes, where that stuff isn't happening anymore. Not at all. I don't know about your kids or your grandkids, but my kids, my grandkids are really smart. They're wonderful kids, but they don't know anything and they don't care to. They don't care a whole lot about their families. Sometimes they pretend to by asking some questions, and then that follows by with rolling eyes. Okay, great, I love it. That's about it. but they don't really care as much as I'd like them to. So what we do, we're sort of keepers of these stories, and our ability to fondle them and cultivate them, nurture them, and tell them to our families, whether they like it or not, is really our responsibility. Now, one thing that narrative theorists, don't be afraid of that word, theory is actually a pretty practical thing because it means that it demonstrates some kind of validity and reliability of a principle which can sustain us. So amplification is a principle that many of us take for granted and don't use nearly enough. Amplification is a way of characterizing a value in a story. So for example, when you think about an amplifier of a stereo, you think about something that heightens the intensity, that allows us to listen to the music more carefully, more enjoyably. We listen to the riff, we listen to the drums, we listen to that beautiful piano piece, we listen to the part that we remember that brings us so much joy to that music. And the same thing works in the area of storytelling, because when we think about an amplifier, we think about exaggeration and how we really do have a license to do that. So for example, all of us have told stories about, well, things that happen in our lives, and we want a little bit of sympathy. So suddenly the hurt was a little deeper. Maybe the kiss was a little longer, right? The person was a lot more of a prick than he really was, but we do whatever we can to emphasize the misery in our life as well as the grandeur, right? Maybe we took an easy quiz and we got an A. What do we say? It was an easy quiz, I got an A? No. What we say is, man, that was so damn hard. I can't believe I got an A. I thought for sure I was going to fail. Nobody had any answers to these questions. I can't believe I did as well as I did, right? And that makes you feel a lot better. So we amplify sometimes in order to really establish a value. Why is that so important to us? Well, we amplify that point. Joel Ben Izzy, I don't know if Sue Kuntz is there, but Sue did a really magnificent job in getting Joel Ben Izzy, who's one of the nation's best storytellers, literally in the world, actually, to our 2026 festival. I had the honor of calling him a friend. And Joel Ben Izzy is a person who actually specializes in the art of amplification and talks about why amplification is so important for us as storytellers to buy into and to use as a license. He has a book entitled The Beggar King and the Secret of Happiness. It's an anthology of short stories that come from all over the world. And one of my favorite stories is a Romanian story called The Cricket. The story is that the cricket wanted to jump to the moon. He tried and he tried and he tried, and he only got to the top of the tree. So the cricket mommies and daddies in the village said, oh, well, the cricket only got to the top of the moon, but he really tried. And that's the best we can do, to try. Well, Joel Ben Izzy told the same story and made it his own, except this time, when the cricket finally made it to the top of the tree, he said that all the cricket moms and dads couldn't see him. So as far as they were concerned, maybe he really did make it to the moon, and they left it at that. So for centuries, cricket mommies and daddies in cricket villages told their kids, you too can make it to the moon if you really try. Now, is that exactly the same story? No. It's an amplified version. It's a hyperbole. It's what he does in order to create a value. See what I mean? So in other words, we use amplification to create values on a stronger level. And we actually do this all the time unknowingly. One of my own, and this is more of an opinion than anything else, whenever you tell a story you never want to end a story by saying, well, I want to back up. Not never, but you rarely want to tell a story and then end a story with, by the way, everybody, that was a story about hope. Your story is supposed to tell us the lesson, isn't it? Right? It's about the lesson. Now, some people disagree with that, and that's cool. That's fine. It really is. But theoretically, a story is supposed to tell the lesson. I mean, that's what apocryphal stories do, don't they? All of you know that George Washington did not chop down a cherry tree. You do know that, right? Okay, just checking. However, if he did chop down a tree, he would be the kind of person to go up and say to his dad, Pa, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down that cherry tree with my little hatchet, because he is an honest person, right? I mean, that's what it's all about, the fact that he's honest. So when we talk about any kind of a story, in this case, we're sort of pinpointing folk tales as an example, but whether it's a personal story, a folk tale, a fable that uses animals to personify the human condition, a fantasy, which is characterized by beginning in one world, going to another, and then returning, right? Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. And then what does Dorothy say at the end? You, and you were in it. You were all in it. It was sometimes really terrible, but mostly it was really beautiful. Okay, so she's sitting in her room back in Kansas. Regardless of the story that we tell, our ability to amplify the segments of that story that teach a value, that give our listeners a reason to listen, is used best by being an amplifier, by knowing what to amplify. Now, I was just mentioning a few storytelling genres, fairy tale, folk tale, and the like. I wanted to focus on a myth for a second, interestingly enough. You know, a myth is often seen as a model for our personal narratives when you think about it. Because what is a myth about? When you think about a Greek myth, myths are designed to explain the inexplicable. You know, why do I feel this thing called love? I don't know. Ask Eos, the goddess of love. She'll explain it to you. And when we take a look at mythology, we don't have science or math or anything like that. So we have to take a look at the stars and the constellations and gods in order to help us explain something. Now, obviously, we don't live in a world where we need that stuff anymore. Some people do, some people turn to it, but fundamentally, what we do is to look at our personal narratives as actually a kind of personal myth. I want you to think about that for just a moment. This segment of this workshop, remember, is about how stories really benefit us, right? How stories benefit us. So they help us to shape value systems. They give us an opportunity to think differently and descriptively. They give us a chance to connect. They give us a chance to do a number of things, but they also help us to solve problems. You know, my good friend Michael Winters is sitting there. He's a therapist, and he'll be the first to tell you that the best way to find out how people are feeling and what their dilemmas are is to gently access a story from them. However, you really can't access a story from them until they've distanced themselves enough to feel comfortable telling that story. Let me give you an example. I had a student a few years ago who told a story that was still gives me goosebumps. It was one of the most riveting tales I ever heard. And let me paraphrase it. He's 22 years old. And he's telling the story about his father, who he loved dearly, who came home every day from his laborer job at 5:30 in the evening. He always met his father at home because his father and he were so incredibly close. His father was sick. His father had cancer, and his father went to MD Anderson every week for treatment, but he still came home all the time at 5:30. The impression is that he was doing really well. Well, about 2.5 years into this treatment, my student talks about his grandmother coming over their house and saying, pack your bag, we have to go to the hospital to see your father. And my student says, well, what do you mean? It's almost 5:30. He's going to be home. And his grandmother says, no, he won't. So he goes to the hospital. And he sees his mother coming out of his father's hospital room, crying, running up to him, hugging him, and saying, you've got to go see your dad. He's not going to make it. And before he could say anything, the doctor comes out and says, son, you and your mother have to decide about what we're going to do with your father. He's on life support. And his will indicates that we need to take him off of life support, but you and your mom have to agree to it. And I am not kidding you. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that 26 students in this class just looked at him, jaw open. And what made it even better is that it was near the end of class. And you know what that's like. Students always tell you, the teacher, whether it's the end of class, they grab their books, they look at their watches, they're ready to go. They didn't budge. They didn't move. They just looked at them. And he must have spent a good 90 seconds pausing. And he looked at everyone and he said, I was so mad at my dad. How dare he not come home? So I went into my father's room, he continues, and I looked at my father. I spoke to him, even though he couldn't answer back. I said, Dad, you've never lied to me. Why are you lying now? Why aren't you coming home? Well, I knew the kind of pain that my father was in, and I knew that this was hopeless. So he died by my word. He paused again and he said, it's been a year since my father died. And every day at 5:30, I sit on the front stoop, hoping to see him. Every day at 5:30. Because he never lied to me, ever. Now, that was a story that was very important to me to share with you because it was about him reconciling an issue. It was about dealing with something that was pretty powerful. I want to play something for you that I think you'll like. And I want to tell you a little bit about who this person is. David Ramey is a friend of mine. He's a brilliant actor. He is an actor at the Alley Theater here in Houston. And when he was on the radio show, my radio show a few years ago, he's an actor, right? I never saw anybody more nervous. He's walking around the studio, a nervous wreck. And I said, David, what are you nervous for? My God, you're an actor. I mean, this is easy, schmeezy for you. He says, no, it isn't. Oh, no, not at all. This is really hard for actors, very hard. You can give me a script and I can be anybody, anyone. I can play that role. But what you're asking me to do is to play me. And boy, that's hard. And that's what storytellers do. And I can't think of a better definition of storytelling versus theater. So wanted to go ahead and play this for you. He's talking about his sister.
I often wonder why it is that certain childhood memories have stuck with me throughout my life. But there are a few that stand out, probably because of their freshness to me as experiences. And most of these lingering memories of my youth center around my little sister. There were three of us, she being the youngest and the only girl. My dad spent his life in the Air Force. After I was born, he was transferred to Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. And so, soon he bought a house in the old section of town. It was a big house, and it sat on the corner of the block. The back door opened up into a driveway lined with two long rows of bricks to keep the car from sinking into the mud when it rained, which came up along the street from the back of the house to a tiny porch of an efficiency apartment that came with the house. This particular day, my mom was overwhelmed with too many things to do. She was trying to wrangle 3 kids while cooking and fielding phone calls. For probably 15 or 20 minutes, she'd been trying to get us out of the house for some appointment she had. Part of the delay was that we couldn't find our new puppy, which we had only for maybe a couple of weeks. I don't remember if it was a male or female, but I do remember it was cute. And it was had a soft medium brown coat and floppy ears and bounding energy and puppy breath. It was the first dog of for us kids, and we were thrilled to have it. My mom finally said that we had to go, and we'd look for it when we got back. She piled us into the car, and we were off. We got to the end of the driveway, and my mom suddenly stopped the car. There, where the car had been, was the puppy lying lifeless on his side. The puppy didn't get crushed, but it was dead. We were all shocked, and I'm sure my mom was riddled with guilt. Leaving the car where it was, she had us get out, and she went inside probably to cancel whatever appointment she had. And then I remember my sister went and got her wagon. She could have been more than 3 or 4 years old at the time. The puppy would often sit in the wagon and let her pull it along the broken sidewalks around her house. So she went to the puppy and set it up in the wagon. And then she pulled it a few feet. But when she looked back, she noticed that it was lying down. So she went back and tried to stand it up again. And then she would pull it a few feet and look back and stand it up. I was stupid. What was the good news? I guess it stuck with me all these years because it was strange to me to realize that she just didn't know and couldn't comprehend what happened. Now, years have passed since the puppy incident, but we found out that my mom was expecting a baby. It was a fresh idea since we were all old enough to understand what this would mean. There was much excitement on the thought of someone new in our lives starting from scratch. My sister, of course, took to fantasizing about the new addition. Being a girl and the youngest, she was particularly captivated by the idea, especially when she found out that it was going to be a girl. Perhaps it was the newfound sense of responsibility that came from being elevated from the youngest child to the oldest girl, or excitement from the fact that she would no longer be the only girl in the family. But it set her in a whirlwind of preparation. She was always talking about what she was planning on doing and how she was going to help with this task or that, and how she was going to be the big sister to her little sister. Finally, the time came for my mom to go off to the hospital. We all wanted to go, but they made us stay at home. And finally, after what seemed like days, they told us the baby was born. But there were complications. Time passed, and every day brought with it new uncertainty about when the baby and my mother would be coming home. My sister was very anxious, but we all believed that it would be okay in the end. Our newborn baby girl hung on for 11 anxious days. My mom finally came home, and we were told that the baby didn't make it. This time, my sister didn't understand what happened. And the memory that lingers most vividly for me is all of us around the dinner table with nothing to say, surrounded by the whimpering sobs of my sister who could not stop crying. Sorry for what seemed like days. We had invested so much in anticipation of this new life that would transform her world. The sadness was overwhelming to her, and she couldn't quite come to terms with her feelings of grief and newfound sense of loss that was all so very final. In that moment around the table, all those dreams and plans for what was to come were not yet ready to find their resting place. My mother finally asked my sister if she would like to go to her room. She said yes, and left the table with the sound of her sobs trailing behind her. The dining room was quiet then, except for careful forks on plates and glasses coming to rest. I don't remember how dinner ended. That didn't stick with me. But the loss that my sister felt was an unshakable memory that stays vividly in my mind.
What are your impressions of that story? Did you like it?
The sound was going in and out.
Oh, sorry about that. Did you get most of it though? Get a sense of it? Yeah.
Yes.
Do me a favor. I don't want you to generate a story. Don't worry about that. But I'd like you to write down, if you would please, a moment, a memorable moment that you feel was designed to somehow solve a problem, some sort of problem that you had, and you told a story about it to someone, even if it's to yourself. This segment of this masterclass / workshop, just as a reminder, because I think it's important to do that, is to talk a little bit about how stories affect us, what they do for us. And we know that they, of course, validate us. They test our vulnerability. Storytellers take people on a journey. They return them safely to the present. We know that they teach value systems and lessons to be learned. We know that. And we know that with the tool called amplification, we can do things verbally and non-verbally to really heighten that level of awareness so that our listeners can become fully engaged. We know that. But now we're tapping into something a little bit different. The idea of looking at a story as a way of solving a problem is really one of the better kept secrets. We don't think about it much that way. We don't think about a story as a way of solving a problem. Did you jot down a topic, a time when you might have told a story to solve a problem? Anybody? I'm not going to ask you to tell the story. I'm just curious. Great.
Yes.
Yeah. Hester, could you just give us a few words about that time when you thought about you needed to solve a problem through a story? What was it about, briefly?
She's on mute.
Actually, I don't have a response to that. I was listening to your words, trying to formulate it, and nothing popped into my head. I think what you're saying is valuable, but nothing came to me, Hank. Sorry about
That's
that.
okay.
I was listening.
That's okay. Hester, I think you had your hand up. You're on mute.
No,
Hester, you're on mute. Okay.
Hester, if you look on the bottom,
No,
you'll see
no,
your
I'm not-
audio.
I'm not
You
on
can
mute.
tap audio.
No, Hester, not Chester.
Hester, okay, all right.
H. Oh,
Okay,
There
am
you
I
go.
on
There you
mute?
go. Yep, you're good
Okay,
now.
all right, thank you. So I substitute teach, and today I did a class. I did a substituting for a class of people that are not, in a sense, suitable for regular classes.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept hearing profanity in the classroom as they were talking. Teacher next to me didn't say anything, teacher across from me, but I took all I could take. So I couldn't take it anymore. So I said to the student, I asked the teacher, can I say something? And to the students, I said, you know, I'm a grandmother, I'm a mother, and I'm a woman of age, and seem like you guys should have a little more respect for the words that you're using. You know, the profanity is just a little bit too much, and it's just make it difficult. So later, when we went across, they were telling these same young men about going interviewing for jobs. So the teacher that knows me said, well, Ms. Moore, I heard you today talking to them about using profanity. And I said, yeah. Well, let me tell you a story. And this is what I told them. About a year or two after I graduated, a teacher asked me to come over and speak to her class. So I'm about 19, 20 years old. And kind of fresh of the way I taught when I was in high school. And then, 2 years later, I also mixed in that a story with something that I learned at the Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. Learn how to have a conversation when you're at home. Learn how to have a conversation when you're out with your girlfriends. But there's also a conversation you need to learn to have when you're being interviewed with a job. So I went back and I told them, I said, I was about 18 or 19 years old when this teacher asked me to come. I said, back then we referred, as a young person, we referred to ladies as bras. Oh, that bra, she this and she that. I said, but so when the teacher asked me to speak and I was referring to someone as a lady, I was about to say broad, and I didn't want to say that. So I was giving them an example that is hard to separate sometimes how you're talking with your friends, but you're going to have to learn to do that. You're going to have to learn how to, to know what your environment is. So I told them a little story about me being, 19 and going back to the school, and that it really stuck with me what I was taught in New York, but also what I had to learn right on the spot. Being, I guess, an inspiration of somebody graduating, but I was still using language as if I was still in high school. Does that make any sense?
That's a great example. No, that's a great example. I know exactly what you're talking about. That's a great example. Just sort of a fun exercise. This is something that I designed years ago, which I think you're going to like. What I used to do in workshops is that I used to give adults, children too, but adults, two characters that are totally ridiculous together and a problem. So for example, a smart pig, a large baby in an attic, for example. Okay. Now, that sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But here's something that two high school students came up with together as a group. Okay, here's what they said. Hey, are you up there? Your mother will be home in a bit and be angry with you. Is that you, pig? Oh, so I'm only a pig, am I? Okay, Sylvester, sorry. Not important now, but we got to find a way to get you down from there. I'm too large to retrieve you. Well, I'm big. Yes, and you also have a small brain. What did you say? Nothing. Let's just get you out of there. Okay. Now, there's a little story about a smart pig, a large baby, and an attic. Just go with me here for a moment. Here's another one, a Sicilian grandmother, an NBA player in a rowboat on Lake Michigan. Okay. Yeah, okay. So here's what this person came up with. Well, this old grandmother was dumped into the boat from a tugboat in order to get this NBA player to the Pistons game because clearly they're near Detroit. And she said to him, do what I say, or I'll make you an offer, or I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. Okay, so there you go. It's ridiculous, but it really did strike me that you can take two ridiculous characters and a problem and make a story out of it. Now, you're a smart group. Let's think about why this is so important. We live in a very diverse world where we sometimes wonder how to maximize human resources among people around us, right? We wonder how anybody can be useful in making a decision or solving a problem. It never really occurs to us that when we start creating dialogue and we start understanding where those resources come from, how easy it might be to solve a problem, right? I see some of you nodding, so you know what I'm talking about. Now, this kind of an exercise yields all sorts of things, everything from team building to cross-cultural strength, to maximizing resources, to listening actively, to a number of things. But let's try one ourselves. I'm going to give you two strange characters and a problem, and I'm going to call your name, and you're going to continue that story. So, for example, for example, John, where are you? Or Tim, I know John is there too. Tim, I'm going to ask you to start the story in a moment. I'm going to ask you to stop in about 30 seconds, and then I might call on Sandra to continue. Get the idea? Okay, all right, so here's what we got. We have a 100-year-old man, an undertaker in a donut shop. You got that? Okay, Tim, begin.
100-year-old man entered a donut shop and sat down and turned to the man beside him and said, "What do you do?" I'm retired. And the man beside him said, I'm an undertaker. You look quite old. I might be interested in doing business with you. The
Okay.
100-year-old man.
Okay, stop. Nancy? There you go.
Oh, the 100-year-old man said, "No, I'm too young for you to be thinking about doing business with me. I have a lots more goals that I wish to accomplish in life. And so you'll have to go pick on somebody else, your own size."
Okay, good. Daniel? Go pick on somebody your own size. Okay. Daniel, continue.
I'm hit. There we go.
You're good.
Yeah, finally. The Undertaker said, "Oh, BS. You look like you're on your last legs. And if you eat that donut, I know for sure you're going to drop dead right here. Why don't you give me that donut?"
Great. Perfect. Karen?
Well, now, the 100-year-old man turned and looked at him square in the eye, the Undertaker, and he said, "Just when I was thinking about donuts, you had to bring that up. Now, all the fun's gone out of eating this donut here now."
Okay, very good. And Viveka, why don't you clean up that story and end it?
You know, I don't know how we got off on the wrong foot here, but it just occurred to me, said the 100-year-old man, that you just said you wanted to do business with me. You didn't say what kind of business. So let's start over. What kind of business do you want to do with me?
Okay, that's an interesting ending. That's a great ending, right? A little bit of intrigue, a little bit of intrigue. All right, Matthew, could you give this story a name? What would you title the story?
I've heard the question. I'm just wondering which direction to go.
That's okay. Any direction that you want to take is good.
I think quite simply it could be doing business.
Okay, doing business. That's what you'd call it. Okay, good, good. That works. That works. Minetta, what title would you give it?
A day in the life of a donut shop.
A day in the life of a donut shop. Okay. Now, whatever you want to call it and whatever you want to do with the story, here are a couple of interesting things. This story has never been told in the world. You just told a story that has never been told ever, never, ever, right? And this is how people create all kinds of strange stories, children's stories in particular. They take characters that don't necessarily belong together. They take a problem, they put it together, they solidify these characters, they understand how they might fit together, much like a jigsaw puzzle, and it works. But here's something else that this kind of a problem-solving technique does that some of us don't realize. The number one listening problem, at least for us Americans, is that we're more concerned about what we want to say rather than listening to what the other person has to say, which means that we come up with a response even before we hear the question. If somebody is sitting in front of us, our little friend in school, Tim is sitting in front of me, and I know that one of us is going to get a little star on our forehead for participating. We're both doing, ooh, ooh, ooh. I'm going to push his hand down because I want the star. I don't care if Tim has the most profound thought known to the universe. I want the star. I don't care what he has to say, right? I want you to think about that for a moment. You're a smart group and you understand how storytelling does a number of wonderful things that we already know about. But what about as a problem-solving mechanism? What about as a way to improve our active listening, our ability to sense and interpret and respond to all kinds of sensory stimuli around us? It does that too. It does that a lot. I was, we know that advertisement, commercials, for example, are stories, right? I was consulting many years ago with a creative team at a small advertising agency here in Houston. And all I was really doing was helping them learn brainstorming techniques. And I actually learned this exercise that we just did together in a different setting, different kinds of characters. And one of the commercials, which is nationally televised, although I haven't seen it in a while, is a Johnson & Johnson commercial with a hospice nurse. It's a 30-second ad. And it's a magnificent story told in 30 seconds. It is a narrator, the woman, the nurse, the hospice nurse, is in a hospital room with her patient Helga from Finland. And she speaks to the audience and she says, "This is Helga. I'm a hospice nurse and I'm with her every day. And today, Helga told me about some sort of ritual that you go through in Finland where you have to have your feet face a window right before you're ready to die." And I told Helga, "That's a great story, but not today, Helga, not today." And that was it, right? It was really a beautiful story, wasn't it? And that's the kind of thing that exercises like this actually do. And that's what I wanted to leave you with. I also wanted to share some other things, and that is that some of the learning outcomes that we think about when we think about what storytelling can teach us. And let me just rattle off a few that won't really surprise you, but these are measurable outcomes. These are empirically studied, measurable outcomes that storytelling teaches people to do. An increased awareness and understanding of culture, a better way to grasp and tolerate different cultures, a way to develop greater appreciation for the beauty and rhythm of language, a creative way to improve listening, a way to refine speaking skills, a way to develop problem-solving techniques, a way to cultivate skills and patterns in writing, a way to develop imagination, a fun, practical way of increasing your vocabulary, and on and on and on. The whole notion of what storytelling teaches us is frankly far more important than we'll ever imagine, than we'll ever know. Boomers, number of you are out there boomers. Remember Marshall McLuhan, 1960s? Marshall McLuhan, media theorist. He wrote two iconic books. One is The Medium is the Message, and the other is Global Village, The Global Village. What he did was to essentially break history into 4 epochs, or actually it's pronounced epochs. And an epoch is a system by which we look at the prevalent communication technology that was used during that period. So for example, around 2000 BC, it was the tribal epoch, or what he called the oral culture. And that was followed by the literate epoch, where phonemes and reading was taught, and then the print epoch with the advent of the printing press, and then finally the electronic epoch, which of course computers, stuff that goes bump in the night, and the like. And the tribal epoch, that very first one, is where storytelling was the prevalent medium, right? And, for example, kids don't understand that when they're at a campfire, sitting around a campfire, that comes from the tribal epoch, telling stories in a circle so you can look at each other, maintain direct eye contact, equalizing the status in the relationship, and remembering these stories. That came from the tribal epoch. Now, here's why this is, I think, very fascinating. It really is. You know, when we think about today, I'm trying to think how to phrase this without really being too critical of Gen Xers and some millennial. I've been teaching them for 45 years. And I love my students, and I swear they're really bright, they're very creative, but it's unbelievable how the lack of storytelling has really impacted them negatively. We know about, they're reading fewer books. They use vocal segregates, like, like. It's a typical sentence. Their phones are always on their person. Social media, they have an inability to say, you're welcome, and said it's no problem. They don't know how to say, I'm sorry. Instead, they say, my bad. They do this, and that's okay. All right. It's their culture. It's cool, and it's fine. The problem is that the tribal epoch, hundreds of years ago, produced better storytellers than we have now. And that's one of the reasons why Richard Stone, in his book, The Ancient Art of Healing, talks about a concept called destorification, which means that we suddenly in our society have a reason not to tell stories, which is ridiculous because we actually have every reason in the world to tell stories. And that's why TSA is so incredibly important, why we're so valid, why we're so powerful, because we really promote something that has to be promoted. It's not just fun. It's really a necessity, because with stories, those learning outcomes that I stated just a few minutes ago, not to mention that problem-solving schemata of what problems can do if we know how to tell a story around them. This is really very powerful stuff. Organizations have been using it for decades. We know that industry that takes storytelling seriously is more productive in a number of different ways, more than we could ever imagine. But, I'm always, but one story that happened a few years ago that told me that we really have to get back to storytelling in order to induce knowledge is when I walked into a Starbucks. It was several years ago. It was a Friday morning, and there wasn't anybody there. And this is important to know. Nobody was there with their laptop. Nobody was there with their phone. Nobody was there working. I was the only one standing in line, the only one. Even the guys working there were just getting their uniforms on. So I stand up there, I place an order, tall, not fat, vanilla latte, and the young man, about 20 years old, asks me, "What is your name?" And I said, "I'm the only one here. Why do you want to know?" He says, "Well, it's what we do." So I said, true story, I said, "Okay, Mick Jagger." He paused, looked at me straight in the face, and he said, "Sir, we only need your first name." Okay, so I just thought I'd share that. So I knew, damn it, I knew we were in trouble. And I've got something here that I wanted to share that you folks already know, but I have this is a letter that was written by a 21-year-old Union soldier minutes away from Gettysburg, okay? Now, this is a pressure situation. He's going to Gettysburg, right? Come on, give me a break, all right? And this is what he says. "My dearest wife, I fear I may not see you again, and our darling Sarah. The whole Reb army is waiting up the road a bit, and I'm told by the fragrance of blood, as I write, that looms largely and clearly, that I may not make it home. And how I long for sleep. Seeking peace in earnest is questioned by most, and words are tender to doubt all but death. I want you, my beloved, I fear the worst, for the worst is to feel fear without the canopy of protection over my heart. I do love you so. Come on. This guy's walking into Gettysburg. He's 21 years old. Huh? Do you know anybody who speaks this way now? I dare you to find one. Okay, so this is 1863. And the beat goes on, so to speak. This is from Teen Diaries, a wonderful book called Salvaged Letters about about children between the age of 9 and 18 during the Holocaust, during their time at various camps, and writing diaries about how they were feeling. This was a young man at Theresienstadt in 1943, 17 years old. And this was one of his diary entries. He says, I was so cold, I slept under a corpse. During the night, of course, I didn't realize it. It was very cold, and I curled up against someone's back. I slipped my hand under her armpits. I thought she moved, and in the morning, I discovered she was dead. Okay. Now, needless to say, this is a very poignant piece. But all I think about is that these are kids who don't even have paper and pens. Sometimes they write them on rocks, they write them on clothes, they write them with anything. And they do it because they have a need to write. They want documentation of how they feel. We know that. However, the kind of pressure that they have to feel, the kind of tension about facing death momentarily, and still they're able to put their thoughts into those kind of words, I think is astonishing. And I just want you to think about it, because this really has a great deal to do with our ability to have a sense of meaning of words, to create a sense of spirit, to be able to share thoughts and ideas clearly and poignantly and descriptively, because we're exposed to books, and we're exposed to stories, and we're exposed to letter writing, and we're exposed to conversation. We're exposed to things then that we are not exposed to plentifully now. Now, the good news is that we are all natural storytellers. And in the next section, in the last section, before we take an intermission, we talk about Dr. Walter Fisher, who created this theory called the narrative paradigm in 1989. Now, Walter Fisher, and I mentioned him, by the way, at our conference when I introduced Lynn, our keynote speaker, if you were there. Walter Fisher at the Annenberg School of Communication in 1989 created this paradigm about storytelling, because he believed we better damn well get back to storytelling, because we better start listening to those people who spoke and told stories during the Civil War, the tribal epic, our grandparents. They did it right. We're doing it wrong. We've got to get back to it right now. So he believed that we are all natural storytellers, because we all have to use words and gestures in order to share meaning, in order to create images, to paint verbal pictures. And he said that there were 3 things that we had to do in order to make a story work on a minimal level, at least work. And those were coherence. Does it ring right? Does it make sense? Another one is resonating. Does it ring true? And a third is focus. Do we have an episode that somehow gives us clarity? But first of all, understand why it's so important for stories to give meaning. I don't know how many of you ever saw the Kaminsky method on Netflix, I think it was. It was on a few years ago with Alan Arkin and Michael Douglas. It was a great series. And Alan Arkin is a movie producer, and his friend, played by Michael Douglas, is an acting teacher. Sandy Kaminsky is his name. Well, Alan Arkin's wife dies. So Sandy says, let me stay with you for a few days because I know you're going through a bad time. And they're walking through a supermarket. And Alan Arkin says, Sandy, you like ham? I was going to get some for lunch. He says, oh, yeah, it's great. So he walks up to the deli man, Alan Arkin does, and says, Deli man, what is your best ham? And the deli man says, they're all good. Whatever you want is fine. And Alan Arkin says, let me put it in story form. You just committed a heinous crime. I mean, you killed a village, not just a person. You've had it. Everybody wants you fried. Now you're on death row and you plead to the governor, please let me off, please let me off. But he's not listening to you because you are one bad mother and you are going to fry. However, as bad as you are, you get a final supper and you love ham. And the guard asks, what do you want for your final supper? And you say, ham. What kind of ham? The guard asks. And what will you say? Oh, I say honey glazed. Okay, then I'll have a half a pound of honey glazed ham, deli man. You get the idea. Okay, so, the idea is that when you put something in story form, it starts making sense. But what about kids? All of you are kids. We all have that in common. Did you ever try to get out of school? What'd you do? Tell your mom, I don't want to go to school? That wasn't going to work. You need to say something like this. This was something that was said by a 9-year-old. Mommy, I can't go to school today because I threw up all night. You didn't know because I threw up quietly. I didn't want to worry you. And I don't want to give this to anyone, especially Miss Abrams, because if she gets sick, then we won't have a real teacher for a long time. And we don't like the substitute. She isn't very good. And if we have her, I won't learn anything. So I better not go to school today because you do want me to learn, right? Okay, so there you go. The whole idea is that when we put things in story form, we also know they're pretty persuasive. Coherence, making sense out of things. We are told that common sense makes sense. Well, we'll see if this president could do that, but common sense really does work. This is a story that I wanted to share with you that was told by a 36-year-old student of mine who was going to a high school reunion. He's a model for Calvin Klein underwear, so he says. I didn't put him in a polygraph. Okay. So this is the practice story that he says. He says, no suspenders today. I'm a model for Calvin Klein underwear. I couldn't wait to get to this reunion. Oh, yeah, those pants hiked up to my skin. Today I feel proud. No asthmatic inhaler in my front pocket. I didn't want to go to my last reunion because I didn't have any confidence. Those were 2 years in high school that were just terrible. But now I do. I was scrawny, and those clips on the suspenders, you know the kind with the large brass clips holding up your pants. Well, I wasn't exactly athletic. I hadn't yet overcome those laughs, and I was never chosen for kickball either. Well, I suppose if you listen to this for a while, you might be able to make sense out of it. But we don't have time for that. It's not the storyteller's obligation to give us a chance to figure out what they're saying. It's all about the audience, isn't it? So, a little bit of fine tuning. Here's what we came up with, and after I helped them. I didn't want to go to my last high school reunion because I hadn't yet overcome the laughs that came my way every day during my first 2 years of high school. And considering how I looked, laughs were all I expected. I was scrawny. I needed to wear my pants hiked up to my chin, held firm by those cheap suspenders. You know the kind with the big brass clips latched onto your pants. Oh, it got worse. I used to carry one of those asthmatic inhalers in my shirt pocket. Needless to say, I wasn't seen as the athletic type. Hey, would you want to choose me for your kickball game? I didn't think so. I lost my confidence at every turn during those years, but today I feel proud. I couldn't wait to attend this reunion. I'm a model for Calvin Klein underwear. Okay, we get the idea. Now, the third point, episode. This one is not so controversial as it is depending on how long your story is. But you know, a story, according to Walter Fisher, remember we're talking about the three elements that are essential to at least make a story minimally effective, is focus, clarity, because clarity in communication is everything. So, for example, imagine your life as a sitcom. Every week is an episode, isn't it? So your story isn't about your wedding day, but about the cake that reads Harvey and Sue, and you are Linda and Herb. It's not about the lousy traffic that you were in all day, but the one traffic officer who actually smiled as he waved to you, on in that traffic jam. It's not about the birthday party, but about you listening to the host say, no gifts, and you took that seriously, only to find that you were the only one who didn't bring a gift. These are examples of episodes, and I think all of you know that. But if you have a little bit more time, obviously your episode can be developed a little bit more. But we're talking about, again, coherence, resonating, does it ring true, and focus, an episode. Coherence, ringing true, and focus. I have one last thing that I wanted to share with you, to sort of summarize those 3 points. This is a piece that a student said in her story that I think encapsulates coherence, resonating, and focus. Here's what she says. I guess her last days, the days when she was conscious, were the hardest. Her bed was downstairs to make it easier for family and friends to visit her. I remember one morning, early morning, very early in the morning, my great aunt coming over along with some cousins. Do you know what my mother asked me to do? She told me to make some coffee because there's a good chance none of them had any breakfast. I couldn't believe what she asked me to do. Make coffee. I hated that. Frankly, I even hated the fact that my relatives were alive as my mother lied there dying. I was mad at my relatives. I really was. And I was mad at my mother for asking me to do this because I wanted to spend every moment with her. But I made the coffee. The dog howled. I went back into the room and my mother was dead. I think she waited until I left the room to die. I've spent 8 years thinking about that day, that moment. I think about it every night. I don't know what to do with it, but I can't let it go. So, how stories make us feel? What's the importance of a story? What do we learn from them? And since we're natural storytellers, how do we use them to make them so meaningful? And how do we take elements like coherence, resonance, and episode focal points and make the story at least somewhat effective? After we take a break, we're going to look at the elements of a story which need to be included in order to make it complete and optimally effective. That's not going to take as long. And I appreciate your time, so let's take 5.
Hank, will you tilt your camera down just a little bit, please? Yeah, when you get to reading, then it's just your chin gets covered up. So let's try that.
Everybody doing okay? I hope you're getting something out of this. While we're waiting, does anybody have any questions, comments? No comments, no questions. Everything is totally perfect. Is that what you're saying? Totally flawless?
Well,
I hope you're
when
getting
you put
something
it
out
that
of it. I
way,
really do.
well, I had a question. Were you going to, I don't know whether I missed your comment about a return to story, the growing absence for the need of storytelling, or if you skipped it. Are you?
No, I didn't skip it. That was a comment about why destorification is an important principle. Because one of the things that that has to take place is that we have to return to stories, because there's been a growing need not to use them, and we have to resurrect that. That's all that really means.
Okay.
Hank, this is Tim. Um, Talking about destorification, I'm old enough to remember that when I was in elementary school, my teachers used story in the classroom. And after I graduated from college, I went into law and practiced law for a while. And then I decided to go back in the classroom and teach. And when I went back in the classroom, I discovered that curriculums really destorified by the time that I got back into the classroom when I was 40 years old. So there has been a rapid destorification in our educational system, it seems to me. I did my best when I was teaching. It was easy for me. I was at a private school and I was a religion teacher, so I got to use story all the time when I was teaching. But I saw some of the other teachers who did not. One, my teacher that I shared an office with, who was a history teacher, he used story all the time, and was considered one of the best teachers at our school. So I don't know what's happened with curriculum. Even in the 24 years that I was teaching, I saw more and more and more story dropping out of the actual curriculum that we use.
Right. Well, everything you say is totally accurate, Tim, and that's one of the reasons why the whole idea of stories going away is disastrous. That was the point that we were making. Um, in large part, students have become, well, schools, I should say, have become consumer institutions more than anything else. It's what can we do to keep kids in class, right? Certainly that's true in college. And in high school, for example, teachers have kids read the Hunger Games. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not Of Mice and Men. It's not Huckleberry Finn. It's not Moby Dick. It's not Tom Sawyer. They figure, well, at least they'll read this. So they're catering to kids. They're catering to kids, obviously. But it really is consumerism. I know that simplifies it, but it's true. That is what it is. And when you consumerize it, well, suddenly, you're really allowing the crazies to lead the asylum. You're telling kids they can do what they want, they can read what they want, will require whatever it is that you think you can do, right? And Hester is nodding her head. And this is the kind of thing that's happening. I'm not proud of it being an educator, that's for sure. It's one of the reasons I retired earlier. It really is, because the things that I was asked to do or even put on my syllabus were ludicrous. I mean, they were ludicrous. I mean, I had to, get into all the pronouns, for example, and I got in trouble because I told my students, well, I just want you to be able to use one in a sentence, let alone call you one. And, they thought I was being a wise ass. But in any event, there are all kinds of things going on that really caused a problem. But I think it is pretty much consumerism. At least that's one of the issues. I wanted to show you a story before we talk about the components of a story. The components, if you have your handout, by the way, I do offer you some very specific notes about the elements of a story, just to give you a heads up, because we can move a little bit faster with that since I have most of it on your sheets. But I wanted to show you something first. Dean, you might want to remind me what to do here.
You're going to open up your web browser and paste that link in there, and then you're going to share the screen.
Okay, this is my friend Warren Holloman, and this is a story that I think it speaks for itself, but it's called A Place for Us.
You're in. If you're in, you're in. If you're in Houston.
Take us to a place. We follow these. Earth of Apex is based on stories from that book, and he's going to be bringing that play to life in just a bit. Warren's other plays beyond the WGBH PBS series, Stories from. He and Marcia are proud parents for what I consider to be really uniquely relevant stories. Your first one is called A Place for Us, one of my personal favorites. Let's just kind of jump into it, then we can share some thoughts.
Hank, this first story is about my first visit to a gay bar. But come to think of it, being raised a Southern Baptist in the 1950s and 60s, it was pretty much the first time I went to any kind of bar. Back in those days, we were taught to believe there were two types of people. There were church people and bar people, and ne'er the twain did meet. Well, 30 years ago, I was doing this psychology project that involved filming a series of family role plays. I had a friend who was a professional actor. Now, if you've seen the movie North Dallas 40, it's a comedy about the Dallas Cowboys, then you've seen my friend. Grant played the role of the team chaplain, and he was hilarious. After making that movie, Grant continued to have a pretty good career, but then he fell on hard times. He was in poor health, both physically and financially, and I thought, well, with Grant's help, my film would be really good. Plus, that would give me an excuse to pay him some much-needed money. Well, we shot the role plays. Grant did not disappoint. He was such a good actor. And when it was over, I pulled out my wallet to pay him his fee. He put up his hand and he said, "How about you buy me a couple of beers?" So at Grant's direction, we headed south on Greenbrier Drive, and I soon realized where we were headed. The Briar Patch was Houston's first gay bar. By this time, the 1990s, there were others, but this was still the place that the older men preferred. But because Grant had been sick, he hadn't been there in a while. Just before we walked into the bar, Grant turned to me, grabbed my elbow with both hands, and gave me the sweetest, most mischievous smile. Little did I realize, but he was now recruiting me to play a role play that he was cooking up at that very moment. A role play in which Grant would play himself, a happy, flirtatious, and rather queenish older gay man, and I would play the role of his much younger boyfriend. Now, Grant was not in good health, but you sure would not have known it for the next 2 hours. He took me around that bar, introducing me to all of his friends. He was in his 70s, I was in my 30s. His friends were impressed, and Grant was loving it. And by the way, just so there's no confusion, Grant knew that I was happily heterosexual and just playing along, but I don't think the men in the bar knew that. It was our secret. And Grant loved that too. Well, it was a piano bar, and at a given moment, men started gathering around the piano and singing tunes, Broadway show tunes. They sang with so much gusto, and I stood there awkwardly because I didn't know the words, but I did my best to pretend to follow along. At one point, the pianist singled me out, asked me to sit beside him on the piano bench, and announced he was dedicating a song to me. Then he played a Broadway tune about an old man who takes a young lover. In the original version, the older man took a younger girlfriend, but of course the men changed the words to boyfriend. Grant was loving that too. Now there were, to be sure, awkward moments for me, but there was way too much cigarette smoke, by the way, as well. But there was also so much joy in that room and a sense of community. It was a beautiful thing. Then the pianist sort of threw me a curveball and shifted gears. He started playing, of all things, church hymns, Baptist hymns. I knew all the words to those songs. So now I'm singing with gusto. But as I sang, the words took on new meaning. For example, we sang "Just As I Am." The idea that God accepts me just as I am. It hit me that these men understood in a powerful and personal way the theology of that hymn. Then we sang softly and tenderly, "Jesus is Calling." Growing up, I'd sung that hymn 100 times, and I always took its message for granted, but not these men. In most churches of that time, I realized Jesus did not speak so softly and tenderly to gay men. And of course, we sang "Amazing Grace." Once again, the idea that God's love is unconditional. But the second verse especially jumped out at me. "Through many dangers, toils, and snares I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." I realized that these men leaned on the grace of God to face the very real dangers, toils, and snares of just being who they were. Now I had tears in my eyes, and this time it wasn't from all that cigarette smoke. I realized that these men had been ostracized from most churches, and they had really created one in that bar. After playing several church hymns, the pianist sort of threw in another curveball. He started playing a familiar tune that sounded sacred, but I couldn't quite place it. Then as the men started singing, I realized it was the song from West Side Story about two young people. They had hopes and dreams. They had a love for each other, and they were all destroyed, their hopes and dreams and their love, by prejudice and bigotry. The men sang the song with such reverence, like a prayer, almost like an anthem. There's a place for us, somewhere, a place for us. Hold my hand and we're halfway there. Hold my hand and I'll take you there. Somehow, someday, somewhere. That turned out to be our one and only date at the Briar Patch. Grant's health deteriorated and he died about a year later. But I've always been grateful to my friend for holding my hand and taking me there to that place, because that night in that smoky bar, I think I caught a glimpse of heaven.
Several times, or like a good movie that you want to see many different times because you hear different things. That's what this story does. Is the Briar Patch still there?
No, but it's still there virtually. You can go to YouTube.
Oh yeah.
You can Google something.
What do you think? First of all, I love that story. So selfishly, I wanted you to hear it. Do you remember at the very beginning, and I hadn't planned on using this as an introduction, except that Michael did a great job of talking about, music and rhythm and all that stuff, and I couldn't help the analogy, but, when I was talking about Mr. Holland's opus, about notes on a page, well, a story is words on a page, right? That's what it is. This is an example of lifting the words off of a page. Simply put, lifting words off of a page. It's a soul-filled story that I think most could only envy. But I wanted you to listen to that because I think it's a beautiful story and I think it says so much. And in many ways, it's sort of a performance that summarizes some of the issues, some of the features that I was talking about tonight, but not nearly as eloquently, not even remotely close as eloquently as a story like that. So let's talk about some of the components to a story. And let's start with talking about at the very beginning, right? Elements of a story. Okay, what do we need in a story? We already talked about the fact that a story needs to be coherent, needs to resonate, it needs to be focused in most cases. Sometimes it could be stretched. So what are the features to make it fully baked? Well, the one thing, my students always have the hardest time with the beginning. Where do I start? Well, you can start a story any place, obviously. But Nancy Mellon, one of my favorite writers, said in her book entitled Storytelling and the Art of Imagination, she says, many storytellers think that it's easier to tell a children's story because it provides the standard once upon a time. The novice impression would ruin it because once upon a time offers a sense of immediacy, but we can't do that with a personal story. So what is it that we do? Well, she says, and she concedes that beginnings of stories, personal stories, are like births because they have emptiness and openness. They offer a place of warm receptivity into which the listener can safely arrive. To me, that's very meaningful. With that perspective, what I have done is to offer you some examples. If you have your handout there, what I've done is to break them into various categories. These are my terms. They can be labeled any way that you want. But if you are doing a theme-fueled story program, you're doing a program at a festival, at a party, these are some things to think about. I think that one type of opening for a story is what I refer to as an alarm and compose. Composed is the opposite of an alarm. It doesn't mean that when you offer an alarm, you're not composed, but the composed offering offers that more subtle intrigue. So for example, I slammed the door on the beggar, this filthy, homeless, pitiful man, even if he did claim to be my father. That's an alarm. Composed, he said, I'm your father. Now that's not a bad opening. It's not worse than the first. I'm just pointing out some of the emotional differences. Also, we can use a prologue, which is different from an alarm or composed. A prologue would be something like, all of us have nightmares. When we're kids, our sweat and cries quickly turn to deep breaths and a sense of calm, thanks to our parents' loving embrace. Nightmares are, after all, the stuff of dreams. For me, one repeated nightmare was born of truth, or at least as I knew it. The figure would reach for my throat. Okay. That's an example of a prologue. Also, we can personalize an introduction, or we can use what's called a traditional one. A personal one might be, it's February 14th, and I can only think of the most beautiful girl I ever saw. She's all I can think about on Valentine's Day. She is and remains the love of my life. I knew it the moment I opened the door. Okay. Traditional, Halloween is just around the corner, right? And on Halloween, very peculiar and very scary things happen. These scary things can happen to The Little Old Lady Who Wasn't Afraid of Anything by Jeannie O'Dare. Okay, you get the idea. Does that help a little bit? Does that give you an opportunity to see the different kinds of openings? Right? There are a whole bunch of them that I have. For example, some others here that I've used in stories that I've told. I may be old, but I knew I could take them. Or this guy made me mad. I was standing in a line at Office Max, and this guy cut in line and it really pissed me off. So I told him off, and he got mad. Okay, so that's one thing. Another one, an alarm. The figure would reach out as if to grab my leg, and I would wake at precisely the moment before he'd reached the foot of my bed. Each night, I would wake at precisely 11:55, and my father, with equal precision, would come to my room at 11:57, only to hear me scream with utter fear, the kind of scream you might hear manufactured in a haunted house. He handed me the money with the kind of generosity of heart I never thought would be possible. I saw him in a different light. Different light? Hell, it was the first time I thought he even cared. So these are different kinds of introductions. I know that you have your own repertoire, but it's important to understand that beginnings and endings are really, really, really challenging for so many. When we talk about finishes, well, the ending of a story is also very difficult, but there are a couple of things to think about. When I think about the beginning of a story or the end of a story in this case, sometimes I think about, a padding, meaning that I might end a story by crystallizing it with a similar line with which I started or a very apparent theme. Like, for example, I tell this story about my son and me, this relationship that he and I established over years. And I begin the story by saying, my favorite play is I Never Sang for My Father by Robert Anderson, because I never sang for my own father. He wasn't around. He wasn't bad, but he was sick and he was weak. And then I tell the story. And then at the end of the story, I say, so on that Father's Day in 1999, well, I never sang for my father, but on that day, my son sang for me, right? That's an example of what I refer to as a padding. But sometimes closings are best done by asking yourself, where do you want to finish? And conveying it with your paralanguage, how you say it rather than what you say. So something as simple as, If you wanted to end a story by saying, and I saw him after I left the room, and that was all there was to it. I couldn't wait to leave. Or I could end it by saying, I saw him by leaving the room, and I just couldn't wait to leave. I'm signaling a conclusion. So we can use a padding, an ending that's similar to the way we began, or we can end a story by signaling it the way that we articulate it, by deciding when we're going to end. Characters are another important component in a story. We all know the importance of developing a character, but there are different kinds of characters that can give us some guidance. So for example, whether we're talking about a personal story or a folk tale, it doesn't make any difference. We have what are called stylized characters and flat characters. A stylized character is a character that evolves during the story. The Prince and the Beauty and the Beast. Prince, Beauty, Beast, get the idea? Or it could be a dragon that becomes a human being after a while. In a personal story, when you tell stories about people who have addressed drug rehabilitation and becomes better, or they overcome a major obstacle. These are examples of stylized characters, and we want to offer them the trajectory in that story to make them evolving. Whereby a flat character is a polarized character. Sometimes polarized characters in a story, the prince and the pauper, David and Goliath, or a character who isn't boring, but simply remains the same. Maybe someone who is stalwart and steadfast, maybe someone who is stubborn and foolhardy. These kinds of characters are either flat or stylized. They help us to develop these characters. They help us to develop them into how we want them to be evolved or how we want them to remain the same, static. The narrative arc, we've all heard of the narrative arc. It's not the plot. The plot is the sequence, the details that sit together. The narrative arc is where the conflict begins and ends. One of the best ways to describe it, all of you know Kurt Vonnegut, the writer. There's a video of Kurt Vonnegut doing a creative writing workshop at UCLA. And I'm just going to give you the exact video, and this is what he says. He says, let me describe the narrative arc to all of you, to the creative writing class. I want you to pay attention, he says. I want you to write this down because it's a secret. I'm going to give you the secret on how to write and how to know what to do in crafting a narrative arc. Are all of you ready? He gets into all of this and he becomes very dramatic because I was paid a lot of money to come here and teach you what a narrative arc is. So are you ready? Here it is. Billy wakes up in the morning and he goes on the He moves
February
on.
2020, going on 5 years ago now, was the last
Somebody
gas.
has their, okay, great, thank you. So Billy wakes up in the morning, he's moving on with the day, and suddenly he says, oh shit, okay. That's what Kurt Vonnegut says is a narrative arc. Excuse my language, but it came from him. When you have an oh shit moment, you're beginning your narrative arc. It's a conflict. Something is going on that's going to compel you to try to solve that problem. It's one of the reasons why we spent so much time talking about problem solving earlier, because problem solving really is a core to so many of our stories, and obviously the way that we nurture that narrative arc. Conflict. Well, every story has to have conflict, but we know that conflict is not necessarily combative in nature. Conflict mostly comes from our interpersonal frame of reference. So for example, we might have internal conflict or external conflict. Internal conflict is conflict that we have with ourselves. I had an affair. Do I tell my wife or not? If I tell her, she's going to be so desperately hurt. If I don't tell her, I know that that is dishonest, but I will maintain her dignity. And maybe we can go on. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? That kind of internal conflict drives the story versus external conflict. I'm going to tell her that I had an affair, and whatever comes my way, by golly, I'm going to deal with it. External conflict, the overt conflict that we have with another individual. Other kinds of ingredients that we have in a story. Well, we know that tone is the mood, right? Tone is the mood. What kind of a mood do we want to establish? And we also know that a protagonist is the hero, the main character in a story. Without it, we don't have a story. There are three different phases or three different dimensions. We have a story about us being in the story. We have a story about someone we are observing, right? Or we have a story about someone being told to us. A story being told to us about someone, us observing someone, or us being a character in that story. Whichever it is, we have to have a real good tackle, a real good handle of who that protagonist is. And, you know, finally, although it's hard to say finally, but finally, as far as ingredients to a story, we also have a theme or a motif. You know, a theme is a thread of an idea. The motif is the kind of symbol or icon that we use to reinforce that theme. My favorite storyteller is Billy Crystal. Many of you know Billy Crystal, right? And he's an incredible storyteller. He always has a way of dealing with themes and motifs so effortlessly. And I wanted to share this passage from his book, 700 Sundays, which was an anthology about his relationship with his father. He says, I saw the strangest thing today. The car wouldn't start. I'm on my way to my dad's funeral and the damn car won't start. I call it Stan, you know, the mechanic who worked on that car forever. He was going to the funeral anyway. And Stan, the serviceman from the local gas station, was trying to start it. He and Dad worked on the car for years together, and they kept it running perfectly. Stan always had a smile. Now he was sad. He became sadder with every turn of the ignition key. It wouldn't turn over. Stan's face was determined. But hey, the battery died. I wish there was a way that you could edit people out of your life, like it was a movie. You cut people out who are happy or sad, depending on what you want. The person I wanted to cut out was the funeral director at the funeral home, which ironically was in the shadows of Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. My life had just fallen apart. You know, he is a master, in my opinion, at dealing with these very sentimental themes and using motifs. In this case, of course, the dead battery, the car, you name it, and incorporating them to really paint images that I think are so spectacular that they're really noteworthy. There's one story that he tells about his father on a video where he almost inconspicuously starts to gesture. He says, yeah, you know, my dad knew that I always wanted to be a ball player. So we'd go out to the ballpark. And he could pitch a little bit because he played ball at school. So I'd be up there at the plate with my bat, and I'd be swinging for the fence. He'd pitch, and I'd be swinging for the fence. And he'd pitch, swinging for the fence. And he said, Billy, you're not a home run hitter. Just meet the ball, Billy. Just meet the ball. And he'd pitch it, and I meet the ball out in right field. Solid base hit. And he threw it again and hit it out in the right field. Every ball went in the right field. I was a base hitter. I wasn't a home run hitter. Doesn't sound like much. But my dad pitched and he smiled and told me I'm just not a home run hitter. And then I suddenly became successful. Just popping it into right field. Just popping it out there. Base hit. Those are the kind of stories that he tells. You know, you can really take any story and you could make it appeal and appropriate for virtually any audience. One of my favorite Dr. Seuss stories is Sneetches. Some of you may know it, right? It's a great story about prejudice and narrow-mindedness. And I use this sometimes when I talk to kids about hate, about not hating. So for example, if I was talking to kids, I might say something like this. We all know it isn't good to pick on others. All of us are important and special and are terrific the way we are. We need to accept each other and not change just to fit in. And if you don't believe me, just listen to what happens in the Sneetches by Dr. Seuss. Now, if I'm talking to parents, you know, parents are not wonderful sometimes about teaching their children about the misery of hate and narrow-mindedness. You're just not that good at it. They'd like to be, but sometimes they just can't get the words across. So I sometimes encourage them to use a story like Dr. Seuss. In this case, I would encourage a parent to say something like this. I know that it's difficult to explain the destructive forces of narrow-mindedness and prejudice to our children. This is what I would say to a parent. But it might be time to let someone else do the explaining for us. The Sneetches by Dr. Seuss has helped children ponder the nature of prejudice in a way that they understand. So before you read this very special to your children, listen to it yourself. Let me share with you the Sneetches by Dr. Seuss. If I'm sharing it with student teachers, I might say, you know, being charged with teaching tolerance to first graders is daunting, to say the least. The Sneetches by Dr. Seuss might help you to convey the framework from which solid discussion about stereotyping can come, and a story with the powerful interactive components needed to make the wonderful characters in the story come to life. Components, features, ingredients in this recipe that we call stories. They're just ingredients. And we need them all. We really do need them all in order for a story to be fully baked. You got to have a protagonist. You better have conflict or your story is going to be benign and boring. You're going to have a narrative arc because we have to figure out how to solve that problem. You better have a good opening and closing, because if it's not a good opening, it's Yawnsville. And if you don't have a good closing, you'll be meandering from one point to another without any apparent destination, taking us on a fanciful journey into the unknown. We don't have time for that. So we need that opening. We need the closing. We need things that make the story work and make the story stick. So today, well, we talked a little bit about how stories in and of themselves work as far as making us better people, more value-centered in our own world, what we learn from stories and how they make us richer human beings by validating, by teaching us values, by doing the kinds of things that most people can't even fathom. We also know that it's a problem-solving method, helping us overcome difficulties, not to mention dealing with other individuals with whom we don't have much in common. We also know that we have learning benefits from stories that are longer list than we might imagine, everything from vocabulary to imagination to intercultural differences. We also know that the features of the story gives us the kind of stories that work because we're all natural storytellers. We have to make meaning out of the world. Meaning is creating something in our mind, finding the mode of expression, and then hopefully making sure that our listeners get it. That's effective. We do that by understanding that words and symbols work together. And we need to make them coherent. We need to make them resonate. And we need to make them focused, because there's nothing more important than communication that's clear. Because if it isn't, it's clouded, it's ambiguous, and no story can function with that. Questions, please, from you. Questions, comments. I know that I talked fast, talked a lot. I really hope that you did get something out of it, genuinely. I know you're anxious about leaving, and I don't blame you. But know that I think that every instructor, every one of the master class instructors will have some sort of a handout. So I encourage you to get a file and put these handouts in them and build a collection of them and take a look at them every once in a while, because I think that you're going to find there is a sequence, there is kind of a system behind the sequence that Michael so ingenuitively and so creatively put together. But I'd like your comments and questions, if there are any.
If you have a question, if you'll use the raise your hand function that's down in the react icon at the bottom of your window, that would help us keep that all well organized.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I don't know if you see mine, Hank, but I got my hand out.
Great. Michael, please.
More of a comment versus a question. I appreciate you going through the structure part of the stories. Introduction. What I always say: introduction, body, conclusion. Those three parts. But the reason why is because it's always difficult to get started, and for me, it's a lot of times if I know I'm going to end like I start, with the same quote, the same little bit of a story or whatever. But I like the idea of padding it too, because it makes it easier to know. Plus, I think that people generally they remember what I say in the beginning, what I say at the end, and they kind of fade out probably in the middle.
Yes.
So if I can get those parts cool, then I'm really good.
Yeah, it's really a matter of, right, it's really a matter of looking at a story like a sandwich, right? You got the top piece of bread, the bottom, and everything else. You kind of fit it together. But they both work. They really do. A lot of people like padding because, it's an easier way to figure out how you're going to end on one hand. On the other hand, sometimes just articulating an end in a way that keeps us wondering and keeps the intrigue going can be very, very effective. It depends what you want to do. But yeah, that padding does work for many, and it's a great thing to remember.
Thanks. And I have more, but I want to share the time. And
Anybody else?
Hands up. Hester has her hand up. That's the one that I can see. And
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
I couldn't write fast enough. But wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.
I've been having a story that I've been telling, and as an actress, I feel like I'm acting. And sometimes I just say, Tessa, can you just tell the story? But you have given me some excellent nuggets on how I can unfold the story. And I love what you said about, the beginning. Think about your beginning and your end.
Right.
And all of that stuff.
Yeah, the beginning is so critical. And, I've been teaching storytelling for a long time. That is always, always the problem. Okay, I've got a story. How do I start? And sometimes it's just it's just so easy to just start talking about the story, and an introduction sometimes just comes to you. So, I had a student the other day who said, well, I want to tell a story about my mother's 50th birthday. I told her I don't want to hear about that because 50 is too young, but nevertheless, okay. So your mother is 50. So why is that important? Because she's so wise and so wonderful, and because she's a single parent and she does something that I don't think any other mom can do. I said, okay, why not begin that way? What way? My mom is someone who can do things that others just can only imagine. Being a single mom, just jump into it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm loving this.
Well, I'm very happy because there'll be more of them.
Yes.
Anybody else? Please. Darlene, do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I tried to look for the raise your hand button, but I couldn't find it. So I
Never
just
mind. I
raised
saw
my
the
hand.
manual one.
Look,
I'm used to that. Yeah.
I said, hey, so it was great. I enjoyed it. What I would like to know, is this going to be available for us to go back and look at? Because I was writing down so many notes,
Yeah.
and it was so informative that I want to make sure I got everything. I just want to be sure that we'll be able to go back and look at this again.
Yes. Michael, you can,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's being recorded, Darlene, and that's our plan is to make it available and one day have a library where if anybody wants to go and learn anything about storytelling, they could go to the library and they can
Okay,
go see them. So yeah, this would be one of those. So
awesome.
yeah.
It was great. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Hank, and I see a whole lot of thank yous in the chat too.
I really
Um,
appreciate it, folks. I do. I never take any of this for granted, you know, and I'm glad that it worked. I really am.
Well, one of the things we want to do, guys, is get a chance to share the knowledge and learn from experienced ones. And Hank's one of those. And if you were paying attention, then you got just that. The structure, the backup of to so it wasn't just his idea, but there was some authority behind what he was saying, and we know those things work. I know from remembering when I was a young Toastmaster, that they have their way of speaking, and I've tried to do it my way, and I learned nope, this way works. It's the same kind of way with storytelling. I've tried to do it my way, but I've learned ultimately that the folks that are more experienced are the ones who have studied it, or the ones that research, the ones that are teaching me. They kind of know, and it does work. You try to tell a story that doesn't have a protagonist, and it won't go anywhere. You try to tell a story that doesn't have any kind of climax or some kind of competition, some kind of something going on, then it's like it won't go anywhere. To me, if it doesn't have a moral, if it does, then there's no reason to tell it. And if you don't have one of those, so I think it's great, and I hope you guys not only get a lot out of this one, but I hope you come back next month to get some more. Next month it'll be about finding your voice, finding your story, and making it on your own. One thing for me personally, the finding your voice is a big deal. When I came to storytelling as a speaker, and I do storytelling because if you want to be a better speaker, then you learn how to tell stories, and that's my whole thing. But I started off trying to sound like every person in the world that I ever heard speak, from the minister at the Baptist church, the minister at the Methodist church that I grew up with, the Les Browns and the motivational speakers like Zig Ziglar and all those folks that I'd hear about. And even when I got a chance through National Speakers Association to actually meet a lot of those folks, all of them told me the same thing, and it was find your own voice. Find your own voice. When you find your own voice, then that's when you get it. And it took me a little while, but when I hit that point of finding my own voice, then all of a sudden I became a speaker and I became a storyteller. So getting a chance to even learn and hear more about that next month is going to be a good one for me. And for those of you who haven't learned that lesson, I'd encourage you to be on the front row for that class, because if you haven't learned how to be authentic and find your own voice, as well as the stories that work for your particular voice, there's some stories that I just am not any good at telling. Mythology, for example, that just is not my thing. But you give me some history, and I know what to do with the history. And that's important to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. And the sooner you know it, the better it is, and you can concentrate and just get better at that. Maybe you're not meant to be a saxophone player, so you just want to concentrate on playing the trumpet and get better and better at that. So I encourage you guys to show up. If I get a sympathetic ear, I will wear it out. We are past the 9 o'clock hour.
Yeah.
So I don't want to keep talking. Hank, do you have some final goodbye words you'd
No,
like
I
to say?
don't. I just think that this masterclass series is predicated on the fact that the more we know, the less we know. So we're all really good tellers. That's why you are doing what you do. And the more that we know, the more we have to learn. And I think that's really the beauty of it all.
So, guys, we will have the
Thank
recording.
you.
We'll make it available. We'll put it up on the YouTube channel. We'll make sure that you know when that is, and also give you a reminder to come back next February. And make sure it's not too late. Now's the time to register for the festival in March. Okay, get your hotel rooms early. There's a marathon going on in Denton that same weekend. Hotel rooms will be going fast. We've got 3 of them where we've got blocks of rooms, so you want to be there. And plus, it's just going to be a great festival. You don't want to miss out. And if you happen to be a marathon runner, you can do 2 things at the same time.
And one more thing, I wanted to thank Dean Keith. He's always
Always.
there. No, I mean,
Yes.
look, I need him. Okay. We all need him. We need him, man. We need him. He's not just wonderful at technology, he's really great at explaining things, and he's really very, very patient. So I always want to thank Dean so much for his help.
Hey guys, anybody else need last words? I can't see all of you, so speak up if you do. I can see you all now. Everybody's good. Everybody have a good night. Stay warm and see you next month.
Thanks again.
Good night. Good night. Good night.